We are happy to greet all the participants of Moscow Urban Forum. Unfortunately, we cannot see the faces during the session, but we are convinced that you are watching us online, and there are some people watching us offline. Right, so we are ready to start our panel discussion, accommodation for billions of people, growing major cities and projects of large-scale constructions. And my name is Tsvetkova. So in the 21st century, we have faced several new trends. On the one hand, the city started to fight for human capital, and they started to make capitals and major cities comfortable, interesting, and attractive, to make sure that people could live comfortably in major cities. On the other hand, people are striving for such cities again because it is comfortable to live there. And there is no doubt that it leads to increasing need of accommodation. Can larger scale constructions be comfortable and nice, be exciting in urban environment, become architectural dominance? Can large-scale construction be so comfortable that you move there from the city center? This is what we are going to talk about today, and we are going to listen to the opinions of the speakers. And I will introduce them. Lars Loebner, head of the Department of Housing and Urban Land Use. He has joined us online. Dmitry Volkov, executive director of Samolyot Group of Companies. Maxim Samsonov, marketing director, Tashir Estate. And John Rossen will join us later, the founder of Director General of Commotion. The first question is to Maxim Samsonov. So, what are the mechanisms and technologies that need to be used to make larger accommodations comfortable, attractive, and to make sure that they have their own architectural identity? So, first of all, you have to put people in the center of your activities, and you have to ask people what they need. We believe that our function, as a developer, with a large portfolio of projects, we build accommodation not only for billions of people, but also for billionaires. So the question is that we need to ask people what they need. We need to create a space segmented to make sure that the courtyard, for example, 3,000 square meters, and this is the average area of a courtyard, could accommodate zoning, infrastructure, and accommodations and amenities for people of different age, for sports, for hobbies, and so on. I prepared a small presentation, and I would like to give a more detailed answer to your question. So I would like to show my presentation to you. Okay, please, let's do it. That is the time when people were satisfied with one playground only. This time has passed, and frankly speaking, this time never existed, simply because thousands of people living in our complexes like Stella City with more than 3,000 apartments. People have different status, different family status, and in the time of pandemics it became even more difficult. They go outside and they not only play there, they work there, they do sports, they go outside to organize a picnic on the weekend. Not everyone has a summer house, so the inhabitants of such districts would be happy to transform the outside area into greenhouses. And you know that in many urban settlements people create flower beds right next to their homes. That's why we first of all have to put people in the center of our activities. Currently, we understand more than urbanists, we need to understand people for whom we build such houses, people who are ready to move from small apartments and five-story buildings, who understand the essence of renovation program. These are people who love the city, who want to live in the city, who want to develop in the city, and our task is to create a space where they can live in a comfortable way. I told you about microsegmentation of our courtyard. That is the principle when a courtyard is divided into 20 up to 30 different zones where they are quite isolated. If you create only one big playground, it leads to accumulation of kids in one place, and in the conditions of social distancing, it's not very good for the dissemination of virus. So if you distribute people among the territory, the passenger flows will not clash. People will feel more comfortable. You can create quiet zones where you can relax and chill. And on the other side, for example, you can have an active zone with playgrounds where children run around and shout, and that is perfectly okay. In our courtyards, here in Legacy, for example, which is being constructed at Ramenka, here you have 23 different zones of activities for grown-ups and 15 places for activity of kids. If for some reasons we cannot do it, for example here, there is a complex without any adjacent territory, then where can you locate it? And our company and other companies use different levels. You have vertical greening, you have horizontal greening. Here, for example, you can see one of our projects, West Tower at Minivska Highway. There is a roof and it's used. The size of the roof is about 6,000 square meters. We worked together with our engineers. We tried to locate all the utilities on the roof in such a way that they do not interfere. There are about 30 utility objects, but they can be transformed into something special, like art objects. They can be covered with mirrors, and then you have a promenade on the roof. It's on the 9th level, but it's a zone where you can go for a walk, and you can have a playground here, and the business center can send its workers to the roof to have coffee break meetings and lunch outside. This is what happens if you have a reasonable approach to the process. If you always remember that this is the accommodation for thousands of people, it's necessary to divide the flows of people. You make microsegmentation, you search for various opportunities. Sometimes the opportunities can be non-traditional. I mean, you can create special lobbies, you can create public spaces on the roof, and then you can offer something special. And the format will be truly interesting. One of the questions about our discussion is how to create comfortable environment in the growing city where you have more and more complexes. Where the environment is convenient, where there are a lot of people, but everyone feels fine. So it doesn't look like a warren. And here you can see a tower as a part of the complex. And I think we are going to have more and more accommodations like that. There is a residential tower, and there is an office tower nearby, and a mall which unites it all. It's like a capsule where there you don't have a need to go out of this space. It's a dream of the government of Moscow. You have your hands, working hands next to the jobs. You can save time for kids, for yourself. You can easily go to the cinema and you don't have to drive around. A very important thing is that you don't have to build it somewhere far away from the city center, in the green field, far away from the infrastructural benefits. on the one hand, you have everything needed inside of the project, and the park is nearby. If you want to go for a walk, you can use a park nearby, and it takes you about 5-minute drive to Kutuzovsky Avenue and New Aminevskaya Highway. There are platforms like that in Moscow that can be truly multifunctional and bring it all together. Let's develop such territories together. We truly hope that together with our efforts, the city will have more and more such projects. Thank you. I have a question to you. There's a park on the roof. It's an unusual solution. So it's on the 9th floor. And what is on the ground? There is a mall on the ground. It has several floors and quite high ceilings. There is a zip line that you can use in the mall. It's a different function of our group of companies. There's a department which deals with retail. So on the floor you have cafes, restaurants, mall, entertainment centers, and so on. Then I have a technical question. How can inhabitants go there? There is a common area on the 9th floor. It looks like a co-working space, so it is shared. Anyone can book a place there, for example, for a business meeting, or simply to invite friends. If you have small apartments, it will not be comfortable for you to invite your friends and stay there. It's a common place for people, and from there you can go to the roof. And there's also access from the mall and from two restaurants. Everything is interconnected, which is important. Right, you just have a key. If you're a resident, there's no problem to go there. If it's a guest or a person coming from a business center, and then there's a need to register, and then you can go in. And the technical question, we all live in the city where 6 months of the year it is cold. So what about this space in winter time? Well, there is an opportunity to make a roof, to create special places with microclimate. Smart cities have all the necessary technologies to do it, like in United Arab Emirates, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. They create microclimate, they create outside air conditioning or outside air heating in microzones. That is all possible. And we can create tents and sheds. For example, speaking about playgrounds for kids, a sand pit is always covered with a tent, but the tent is high. It's about 2 meters high. And there's always shadow where the sand pit is for kids. And there are also mobile constructions. You can assemble and disassemble them. These are different solutions. But if you have a promenade, if you have a park on the roof, you can create opportunities of activities all the year round. Right. I have another question. How do you calculate the areas? Don't you think that that territory was taken into account as the territory of your complex? No, it's a multifunctional complex. In addition to the tower with apartments, there is a business center and a shopping mall. So basically, we are using the resources of a mall. We are using the mall's roof. It's an internal information of the company. We basically rent the roof of the mall, and we use this infrastructural resource. We give it to the residents of the residential tower. All right, so your example is a testimony to the fact that if developers want, they will always find an opportunity to make comfortable life for people, even if area is limited. Right, and there's one more thing you shouldn't forget. You shouldn't forget about territory advancement, and of course we need to achieve certain economic indicators. So it's not about charity. It's not only about creating something good for people. It also makes the price of a square meter higher, and there's more demand for it. And of course it is reflected in the price, and people pay attention to comfortable conditions, and they want to live in comfortable conditions. All right, now we would like to ask a question to Mr. Loebner. For the last 10 years, Berlin had a boom of development. Young professionals came to Berlin and they managed to implement their business ambitions and do cultural activities there. So it all required a lot of additional housing. What is the strategy of housing development in Berlin? Do you manage to keep the identity of the districts, and how does it happen?
Thank you very much, and welcome from Berlin. And if we discuss about Berlin, now we discuss about growth. Berlin is on the way to a global metropolis. And as you mentioned before, we have an economy-driven development of employment and residence in the last 15 years. And if we discuss about growth, we also have discussed about responsibility. And it is also global responsibility of a global city. And these two figures, they show what for carbon dioxide is emitted in the past on the left side. And you see that is equalized to the amount, and Germany is one of the big resources of the carbon dioxide which is now existing in the atmosphere. And on the right side of these figures, you see what we produce now. And there is a global shift, and the big question is how we can promise a welfare not only to us ourselves, but also to others. They like to have this welfare, and to how to organize this welfare climate neutral. And on the other side, on the social side of housing, Berlin in the fast growing has exploded the prices for rent, and you see that about 40% is these figures here. They have a cost burden of now more than 30% of their income. And this is a growing number of people. They have problems to pay the rent. And how to deal with, what is the policy? Berlin had set up new urban quarters, we call it like that. So we have a housing demand of about 200,000 units, and we have a potential of 200 units. And a quarter of that should be realized in these new urban quarters. And these new urban quarters are all over the city. You can see here, situated. And the politicians, they gave us guidelines of this development. And I don't tell you everybody, all of them, but this is about also and a sustainable mix of uses, of energy-saving constructions, of provisions of public areas and open space, as the colleague before mentioned. And the big issue is the housing policy is common good-oriented housing. This means most of them are owned by the city of Berlin, and housing companies, which you can see all the projects all over the city, in the inner city and in the outer regions, these projects are situated. And some of this project here you can see one of our biggest one for 10,000 inhabitants. And the big issue is how to create climate neutral, sustainable, mixed use, but also socially mixed new urban quarter. And this is another one in the eastern part of Berlin. You see also we're developing skyscrapers, a new housing project. And the third one shows you this is the former airport of Berlin-Tegel, and part of them should be developed as a housing quarter, which is built from wood, so totally carbon dioxide neutral. And so we have discussed about sustainable growth. And sustainable growth is also participation and dialogue with the citizenships. And we deal with that with workshops and in the planning process with a lot of public which are incorporated in the process. And there are also technical solutions, like how to deal with heating, climate neutral heating. Here you see the wastewater is used for heating. And mobility concepts, very important. A quarter of all carbon dioxide is emitted by the traffic. So we develop in every quarter mobility concepts. Sponge city, next point. So how to deal with rainwater. And we developing their concepts with green and open space to keep the rainwater on the plot. And mixed use, of course, very important, that you find in a 15 minutes walk everything what you need for your daily life. Also your work, your house, your flat, shopping, culture, everything. And a big issue now in Berlin is timber cluster. So we're developing huge area made totally from wood, which are saving carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and freeze them for the next century in the building itself. And of course, Berlin, actually a very flat city in comparison to Moscow and other big metropolis in the world, discussing skyscrapers and high-rise buildings. And we have developed a high-rise building guideline as well. And as you can see, the planning process is very complex. It's a complex matter, and not to get lost in that. So we had set up special units, like my unit in the administration, to develop these quarters from one hand. Thank you very much. That's a short overview about Berlin.
Господин Лёбнер, у меня к вам вопрос.
Mr. Loebner, I have a question. What's the population of Berlin now? When you become a megapolis, what will be the population count then?
Oh, that's an interesting question. The prediction, they're saying that Berlin will be almost reach 4 million in 2030.
Ну, это достаточно быстро. А сейчас...
It's quite fast. What's the current population? Right now, what's the population of Berlin at this point?
The current population is 3.7 million.
Хорошо, спасибо. И еще вопрос.
Thank you. You also mentioned that you have quarters, a high-rise quarters. What is a high-rise building in Berlin's view? How many floors? How many levels?
So by law, it starts up to 22 meters. But what we discuss about high-rise buildings, about 45, 50 stories.
Но это высокое, конечно, это высокое.
This is, in fact, high-rise. Yes, this is high-rise indeed. Thank you. So let's get back to Russian experience. I have a question to Dmitry Volkov. You are developing large areas, so there's no need for you to put up sandboxes on your roofs. Do you have enough territories? What are the principles? What are your principles, the principles that you follow to make those territories comfortable to your residents? And what steps are you taking to ensure comfort of living and livability of your spaces? Thank you for the invitation for this mixed format of the forum, for raising this issue. This issue is near and dear to us. I will gladly share with you our vision, our philosophy. At the beginning you said, you talked about housing for billions, and I thought at some point Samalot houses will accommodate 1 billion people. Now it's 150,000 people, and within 5 years time span it's going to be 1 million residents. And And that's in line with major cities. This is the scale of major cities. We specialize in comprehensive territorial development. Average land area of our project is 800,000 square meters. It's fairly large. And when we talk about our products, our development projects, they are based on close interaction with the urban fabric and urban institutions. Unlike fill-in construction projects, since we are talking about of how to make sure that people who buy mass housing, they can feel comfortable. The word environment has been in existence for a long time. Each has his own understanding of the word environment. We didn't use the word unit or flat in this slide. We wanted to show you how people living in our quarters, how do they view the city, how they view the quarter, how they view how they perceive their home. So the interplay of all these four elements, the home, your private space in the yard, and the quarter. So the city, neighborhood, yard, inner yard, and home. And, you know, a neighborhood may unite hundreds and thousands of houses, and then the neighborhood is integrated into the city fabric. We build housing in Moscow, in larger Moscow, in the Moscow region. So this creates a whole construction. I represent a developer. I look at things through a developer's lens. If we make a good inner yard and forget about the house, the building, there won't be unity. It will not create a good environment. So prospective buyers will not feel comfortable. If we have a great city, if we have digital services all around, if you can order all kinds of documents, paperwork, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, your elevator in your house would be defective, or if your neighborhood doesn't have any trade, shopping center. There are shopping centers in other areas, but you need to travel there, or if there are no kindergartens in your neighborhood, and then you'll have to spend a lot of time to take your children to kindergartens, to schools, and there will be disunity. You want to have a coherent perception. And my colleague from Germany was speaking about it. Mass segment developers are hugely responsible because we try to integrate all these four elements. Comfortable living, relocation. People actually could relocate from one of our houses or one of our neighborhoods to another. We have special programs for that. But our responsibility goes beyond the responsibility for a building, a yard, or a specific neighborhood. Our responsibility is to think, how can we make sure that the services you create, they can be integrated into the city services. When we think about the pillars of high-quality environment, livable environment, it all starts with smart master planning, the ability of a developer at very early stages, and oftentimes we start from scratch, where with an open field without anything, no social infrastructure, no communications, no utilities, nothing. So developers' ability to look through the lens of future residents and to develop a master plan in such a way so that the neighborhood would be a comfortable place to live. Russian architects, and it's very heartening to see Russian architects, they now can offer a meaningful, a mathematical approach to master planning. And in our case, errors in master planning may have serious consequences, which would be difficult to change, to address. Have we ever made mistakes? Yes, we have, because city infrastructure elements and facilities that we create, that we shape, we learn together with the city. You've seen the changes to the city of Moscow. Have there been any mistakes? Yes, there have. But developers pay a heavy price, and our ability to build livable environment for the billions is the real test. A master plan to us is to lay down the foundation for a quality living. We have several hundreds of principles. Today I would like to elaborate on 12 key principles. There are three key postulates. The first one is that when we build our master plan, we want our people to have the same city services and infrastructure facilities within the walking distance that they may find in other places. Second principle is commerce. It's not only retail real estate. We also it is also jobs, because 10 years ago we talked about sleeping quarters. We're not building sleeping quarters anymore. We are building a brand new environment. And the third principle, the original principle of the company, that we're not striving to sell square meters to people. We are motivated by time. We want to save time for people. So when we started our work, so we right away, all apartments, all units were fully furbished. So ready for move-in. Our master plans provide for the construction of kindergartens right away. And we understand if there's no kindergarten in our neighborhood, then people will be wasting time on taking their children to other places. So that's what Samolyot is doing, no matter what segment we are working in, residential, retail, suburban. We save time. We call it time back. That's the word we use in our company. Speaking about master plan and the key 12 principles I talked about, very briefly, they are in line with DOM-RF principles on mass housing construction. And we don't have any human anthills, as you call them, something antagonistic to human nature, where you have something with the same facade, of the same type, the commingling of private and public. It's heartening to see that these standards are now being introduced by the city of Moscow. Of course, you can build a house, but it would be very difficult to correct the mistakes. So we have various heights, high level, high proportion of retail, and we have play hubs at the heart. I prefer to call them large playgrounds, and we have major neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods house 60,000 people, so there could be several big playgrounds. In addition, we are running a very complex business. Our houses, they have a very attractive, I call it video ecology, and we are engaged in large-scale projects. Other projects, they're magnets, centers of gravity, a western base, which we're going to develop. One of our largest projects, 2 million square meters, and that's how we have done it at the master plan level. So there's a square, central square, turned into ice rink in the winter time. Every city, every small city, small town has a square, but we can use the squares for different uses. Sufficiency of parking spots, the availability of a boulevard, green lines, green skeleton of a neighborhood, connecting various points in the neighborhood, saving time, because previously, when neighborhoods didn't have green skeletons, people would go to other parks in some other parts of the city. Again, waste of time. Sports facilities. You shouldn't have sports facilities in your inner yard. It shouldn't be available to everybody in some public places. Our neighborhoods always provide jobs, not as part of retail stores, but also jobs, the housekeeping jobs, transport management, hubs, and private yards, places where you can enjoy yourselves, where you can, they're gated, and you can let your children out, and you can do your things as parents without worrying about your children. In conclusion, I would like to say that I've been talking a lot about master plan and master planning. It's a sore point because if you do something wrong, it's hard to correct it. But oftentimes developers all around the world forget or leave out a very important aspect of this business. And to us, this area is becoming the most important one. I'm talking about a management company, a service company. We can have the best master plan ever, but if you are unable to offer people high-quality housekeeping services, if we don't offer sufficient services in our neighborhoods, a resident, can use 40 types of services, such as home improvement, furnishing, insurance, all kinds of services, in addition to engineering services, which the service companies are offering. So going forward, in the mass segment, the success of mass segment housing project would not so much hinge on your master plan, but rather on your ability to manage that infrastructure and to maintain high standards you promise to your residents. And people need to feel comfortable about communicating with their neighbors and with the service companies. And this is the key to success of a neighborhood. So now we're focusing on providing most user-friendly services to people, starting with the purchase of units. We're helping them with getting a title and offering all other services. For example, collective procurement services. People, through a platform, can buy products, goods at a lower prices in bulk. So thanks to the digital services, our residents save 8 days a year just because we make it possible for them to interact among each other. So a lot of time savings, and It leads to more time with your kids, more time on educational purposes, more time outdoors. So all this is possible. So 88 days are clawed back by our residents. So to wrap it up, a service company, a management company shouldn't be separate from the city. It shouldn't be something, should be independent from the city. We want our service to be integrated into the pan-urban services. For example, each of our neighborhoods has a paid parking lot with security cameras, and a person may use an app using identification technology. It may enter his parking spot. Moscow has a great parking system. It would be great to integrate our parking spots and parking places into the city parking system. So my point is that our services, neighborhood services, should be integrated into the citywide services. And only after that we can say that we've built comfortable, livable environment for billions of people.
I'm sure about the integration of services. And well done. Now it's time for your comments.
Very much. You know, it's really fascinating for me to hear about housing in Moscow and how you approach this, and in Berlin as well. You know, every city in the world has its own typology of housing and its own particular issues of housing. So in Berlin, you have low-rise, generally. It's a very spread-out city. Moscow, you have quite high-rise. Yesterday we were talking about typologies of housing in Chinese cities where they favor massive use of high-rise. In my own country, for example, I live in Los Angeles. I'm a New Yorker, but I live in Los Angeles, where the kind of default housing unit is an individual family home with a garden, preferably a garage, two-car garage. In New York, that's unthinkable. I grew up in an apartment in New York. But what we have to keep in mind is that every city in the world, whether it's Moscow, whether it's New York, whether it's Berlin, whether it's Paris, whether it's Dhaka or Shanghai, have the same problem. That's a lack of affordable housing. And this is one of the biggest issues that we face. We live in a very crowded planet. When I was growing up in New York in the last century, New York was less than half the size it is now. You know, the population of the United States has grown by about 100 million in my lifetime. And people have flocked to cities. Our planet, there are billions more people on our planet, and more are coming along. So there's just a lack of housing stock. And I remember speaking once to the head of one of the biggest real estate developer in the world, and I asked him, I said, what keeps you up at night? And the first thing he said was the lack of affordable housing in the world. So at the New Cities Foundation, which I head, we look at how cities develop around the world, and we do research on all 5 continents, in Asia and Europe and Africa, etc. And we quickly identified housing as one of the, access to affordable housing as one of the key elements of how cities are formed, how they become vibrant, etc. And so we started a program called New Housing Solutions to look at new ways of living, that people live together, new ways of building buildings, so how you make your buildings, new technologies, building tech, etc. So 3D printing of modular units, things like this. What's so interesting from maybe a North American viewpoint is we have the massive arrival in the housing market now of what we call millennials, which are my children. I'm a baby boomer. I guess you have the same phenomenon in Russia. So you had a massive boom after the war, after the Second World War, of people making babies. And it was economic growth. And now those people have had babies. The millennial generation in North America and in Europe, they're starting to have their own children. This is going to be the biggest single demographic phenomenon we will face in our lifetimes. The choices that the millennial generation will make in North America and in Europe. Will they live in inner cities? Will they go to the suburbs? We don't know yet. You know, we just don't know. In fact, we look at this very closely at the New Cities Foundation. But there are a few interesting trends that are going on. One is co-living. And, you know, I think it's also a phenomenon in Russia, as it is in many, many countries. We're moving more and more to a sharing economy where we share things. Now, COVID complicated that whole process because we don't like to share things if there's a pandemic. But I think we'll go back to the idea of sharing transportation instead of having your own car. Sharing housing. I mean, there's an interesting startup in the United States called Star City, which is buying up industrial properties and office buildings and repurposing them as housing, but doing it not exactly communal housing, but there could be a communal kitchen, for example. And it's a way to bring costs down. People today, young people, are experimenting with different kinds of living arrangements, whether it's a single parent family, whether it's you know, two men deciding to have a child. There are many, many different kinds of family typologies now. So one of the other things that I think is going to happen, certainly, and a lot of people are starting to look at this, is how you repurpose dense downtown business districts. So you have these fairly high-rise office buildings like the financial district in New York, which will change because law firms, architectural firms, banks simply will not go back to the kinds of offices that they had pre-COVID. We will go back to offices, but in different ways. And so I think it's going to be so necessary to think about ways to repurpose some of these office buildings for mixed use and for housing. And there was a very interesting essay that Lord Norman Foster wrote about 2 months ago, saying this is going to be one of the big issues about how we repurpose office buildings for housing. That implies also rethinking zoning, which is, you know, every city has its own zoning, but we have to be much more flexible and adaptable. So typically in American cities, in Los Angeles, for example, there are areas that are residential, and then industrial, then office building. They don't blur. There's quite rigid lines between the two. The city of the future has to be a mix. It has to be a mix of uses. It has to be diverse. It has to be inclusive, etc. But you know, it's critically important because in Los Angeles, for example, we have it's not even a housing crisis; it's a housing catastrophe, I would say. We have over 100,000 people living on the streets in Los Angeles. The homelessness problem. I'm not sure if that's an issue here. Oh, okay.
Да, да.
But, thank you very much.
Простите, что я была вынуждена.
I'm sorry that I have to interrupt you. It was highly interesting to listen to you. It's not a comment, it's a big presentation, and thank you very much. But I would like to ask just a short question to you. I would like to start with you, John. You were born in New York, right? Do you think that you can live comfortably in high rises? And what density is comfortable for people? What is the maximum density?
That's a really great question. I think that the idea of 40, 50-story buildings, residential buildings, I think is insane, just insane. It's not healthy for people to live that way.
Нездоровый, да?
You know, we've had to do it, but it's really a lack of imagination, I think. I mean, there are other ways to organize space in a city. And I think that's where the Chinese, I think, will have huge, massive problems in the next generation as these 50, 60-story high-rises in rural areas, as they begin to age,
Да.
the elevators start to collapse. It's going to be terrible, I think.
Я полностью разделяю.
I totally agree with you. What is the maximum height and density for Moscow? What do you think, Dmitry? It's a very, very interesting and at the same time complicated question. I believe it all depends on the district we are talking about. If it's just a single house, then it's one thing. If you are talking about large-scale construction, I believe then it's not healthy to construct higher than 17 floors. Well, you can do it, but you still have to be flexible about the architecture of the building, and I think it doesn't make sense to make buildings higher than 25 floors. As far as density is concerned, well, I can tell you I've seen projects where the density was not so high, but at the same time, the housing was not comfortable. There was no feeling of comfort there. And I saw other projects where there were 15 or 16,000 square meters per hectare, but the streets were located so the central nucleus was built so the floors were different. And I think that the question is not only about density. There's something more to it. Thank you very much, Dmitry. And Maxim, what about you? Well, we have one project at Skolkovo. It's called Stellar City. I think it has a perfect balance. 16 hectares of area, and there are buildings, including schools, and daycare for children, and they take no more than 3,000 square meters. You might say that it's not very good from economic point of view, but it's really comfortable, and it seems like a perfect scenario for me. As far as height and density is concerned, I think that it's necessary to take into account several factors. And my colleague was right to say that you have to think about the infrastructure and what you have on the first floor. Do you have infrastructure for kids? Do you have infrastructure for entertainment? Do you have infrastructure for medical facilities, for educational centers, and so on? And of course, you need to have complexes where you have towers of different height, from 8 floors to 17 floors, for example. And even if you have a very high tower, it doesn't look so high because you have differences in height. And I repeat once again, it's very important what you have on the first floor. If you have enough infrastructure, then you feel more comfortable. Thank you very much. And Mr. Lobna, I have a question to you. Could you please tell me if you plan high rises of 40 and 50 floors, it's really high. Do you really plan it for Berlin? If you locate units for housing there, if you locate apartments there, do you think it will be comfortable for people to live in such high rises? Because I know that for now Berlin is quite flat and people are used to live in flat houses.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And for us, the mixture is the main point. Though it means that you're discussing within the high-rise building a mixture of use and a mixture of different inhabitants and different qualities and sizes. So there are examples in Germany for very good functioning high-rise buildings and housing high-rise buildings, and there are also bad ones in the past. And there's a new generation of architects developing it. And in Berlin is a rule that a high-rise building has not only to focus on its own, but also to focus on the quarter, and should give evidence this is also a benefit for the whole quarter. And this evidence has given by the developers.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. So all the speakers shared an opinion that large-scale construction can become attractive and comfortable for people, and that is the main conclusion of our discussion. Thank you very much for being attentive. Thank you for listening, and let's give it up to our speakers, and we will thank each other for this highly interesting discussion. Thank you very much.